Well, hello, everybody, and welcome to StarryTelling, where we explore the stories, myth, and magic of the starry sky. My name's Amanda Poole Walsh. I'm the founder of Astrology Hub, and I am here with sacred astronomer and astrologer Gemini Brett, and we are so happy to be here with all of you. Today, we're talking about the discovery of Uranus and how it changed everything. I'm very excited to hear what you have to say about this, Brett. Nice.
I just discovered my Uranus cup.
Fantastic. All right. Well, so we usually start this show with a recap of the scavenger hunt from last week, which for those of you who are new to the show, the scavenger hunt is a task that Brett gives us every week to encourage us to go out and look at the night sky ourselves and make new discoveries. And last week, what we were tasked with was drawing pictures of the moon and the planets that were around it every night so that we could track how it changed. So I do remember seeing an incredible drawing from somebody's son. I cannot remember the name, nor can I find the post. But if you're here and watching, we would love to see the picture of that again. It was awesome to see this child all proud of their drawing of the moon and the planets. And if you're here and you can share with us, we would love to see it again. And also just putting it out to those of you who are here with us live. Did you do the scavenger hunt last week? And did you learn anything in the process? Yeah? Brett, do you want to add anything to that question?
Did I learn something?
Yeah, did you learn anything?
I did a different version of it that I will be turning the students onto in the course,
Nice.
which is like learning where the stars live and then watching the moon move through the sign. So I play this game at night and sometimes in what I guess call the morning where I head out and there's a place where I can just see the sky and I can, so I go out and I just kind of work the sky and I'll say, okay, the moon's at this degree, the midheaven is this degree, the ascendant is this degree. And I go inside and I cast a chart and see how close I got, right? And that's what I'm so excited to help people tune into. But the first thing is to, relax all that and just experience it. And it's something else when you start seeing how quickly the moon is moving through the sky. So that motion through the zodiac actually is by some called moonwise because she does it so quickly. It takes Saturn almost 30 years to get around and moon does so in 27 days. Right. So we really get to learn astrology at this kind of fast rate when we follow the moon. And there's so much to see in her reflection. So I'm so glad that some kids are out drawing some images in their field book. It's good. It's really good, just to have that realization. I didn't realize that. I don't know. I must have been 35 years old or something before I knew that.
Exactly. Yeah. So all of your lucky children are growing up with this from an early age, which who knows how that will change their trajectory, right? So yeah. Brett, let's dive in to the discovery of Uranus and how it changed everything. But before we do that, Brett referenced several times in what he just said, the class that's coming up. This is the course that Brett's going to be teaching with us here at Astrology Hub. And you can get on the wait list right now. It's not open yet, but it's called Sacred Astronomy for Astrologers, how to see the chart in the sky and the sky in the chart. So for those of you who are interested in making that connection between the actual sky and the astrological chart, and then starting to learn how to add that into your interpretation of what you're seeing in the chart, this will be a great class for you. This is a level 1, so it's open to any and all astrological students, and you can get on the wait list at astrologyhub.com/sacred astronomy. That's astrologyhub.com/sacred astronomy. We will be opening up registration towards the end of March, and class is going to begin in April. Anything else you want to add before we move on?
It's the roots. It's where we're coming from. It's like some nerdy science class. That's not how I teach this thing. It's not about like the observatory that was built last year on the top of the Holy Mountain. It's about that the Holy Mountain is the observatory, right? And so the old stone circles, the old pyramid sites, these are the remnants from the teachers of our craft before there was a written word, and finding our way back just to a reverent experience. We have the phases of the moon carved into animal bones from tens of thousands of years ago. The cave of Lascaux, ancient people painting the Pleiades on the back of the bowl. And I could go on and on. But the general thing is re-nature your astrology. Remember the roots of these rules and the proofs of the astrological equations we use, because astrology is so much more than some symbolic language alone. It is the poetic breath of nature. And if it sounds like I've said that before, I have. And I've taught this material again and again and again, and I'm perfecting it. And I'm making these little kind of short, like bite-sized things that we can actually like really integrate, before we move on. So I'm so excited. I'm going to start recording on Thursday. I'm waiting for Mars to move into Gemini and a couple of little things to make their moves. And so I've got my time laid out, and I'm ready to start recording. I'm really excited about it.
And it's going to come with some really cool bonuses as well. So talk to them about some of the bonuses that will be included in the course.
Well, yeah. So one thing will be to help you really get to know these stars and where they live in the tropical zodiac. Actually, you're going to learn about 3 popular zodiacs. So just to be able to go outside and see the sky and to have some tools. You'll also receive a few kind of audio guided night sky. I'll be there in your earbuds saying, hey, look at this, take some time, receive that, turn this off, or listen to this drum. And then we're going to go over here, like that kind of thing. Yeah, there's too much to say, actually. So, because we'll all just take our whole half hour doing that. I do want to say, though, Amanda, we had one kind of like, unofficial scavenger hunt a while ago when you were talking about learning to see the Pleiades. And, the moon swam through there. So the moon is like that, sometimes when I'm out with people in groups, I've got one of those laser pointers that you can like shine all the way up into the heavens. I don't point it at planets. That feels really rude to me. But the moon will be that every month. Every month, the moon is going to come and as she's crossing from Taurus to Gemini, she'll be with the Pleiades. She'll say, look at me. And every 2 years or so, Mars will do this. So in our day and age, the Pleiades, they mark the cusp between tropical Taurus and Gemini. So it's so cool right now to go, like, I'm just looking. It's interesting. I'm like, I've got to take a picture of that. And I've not yet. I've just like, I need to like experience this. It's probably they're too far apart to show up in your telescope if it shows up, okay, like next to each other, because you're really kind of narrowing the view when you look through the scope. But it's an amazing thing to see right now. Mars right with the Pleiades. So that's like an important scavenger hunt, because we're going to talk about Uranus, and I can't tell you to go see Uranus, not at this time of year, because Uranus is not visible with the naked eye, right? And that's why Uranus changed everything. How do you feel about that segue right there? That's pretty good.
That was brilliant. It was masterful. Did you plan that?
Who told us that Saturn is about what Saturn is about? Or that Mercury is about what Mercury is about, right? I mean, these things have been around for thousands of years in the traditions from India and the traditions from Egypt and Babylon, and that were all kind of assimilated in the Hellenistic era, and now these things have evolved. This is what our conversation last week accidentally evolved into, is this idea of solvate coagula, and how, and in many regards, as a result of the church literally burning astrologers at the stake, we were disconnected from the kind of roots of these rules from the Hellenistic era. And because astrology is nature and it can't die, folks had to kind of dream into a new way to do it. And there's some really important shifts in astrology that we modern astrologers and modern people, I think, tend to take advantage of, right? So let me ask you, Amanda, what is astrology for? When you're asked that, like when you're visiting a podcast, I know you were on like my sister's thing a while ago, and I don't know if she asked you that question, but if you're being asked that question, because I know you're asked to talk about astrology for all sorts of folks who probably haven't tuned into astrology yet, or what do you say when somebody says, well, what's astrology for?
It's a tool that helps us understand our place and our purpose in this lifetime. And it also, so much, it depends on who I'm talking to, But going into with your sister, because we were talking about fertility and birthing, I talked a lot about its ability to help us connect us with nature's cycles and rhythms and how important that is in actually reconnecting with ourselves. That part of that process of reconnecting with ourselves is reconnecting with nature and the world around us. So it depends on who I'm talking to, but I can go on several different tracks.
Yeah, and that's beautiful. And it's very different than what it would have been a couple thousand years ago, right?
Right.
The astrologer on the fertility podcast, well, let's see if you can have children. Let me tell you how many you'll have and how the third one will die. It's like, wait, hold on a second, right? And it's not like, hey, get to know yourself. This is the roadmap to your soul, right? And these beautiful things, like that's really new. It used to be like, it wasn't long ago, like Alan Leo, right? It's like turn of the century, really last century. Famous for declaring that he had like overcome his karma, that he had graduated from the chart, basically, very much paraphrasing, right? But that was kind of the thing. Like if you've read the autobiography of a yogi, which is a wonderful read, right? Yogananda, there's this whole bit about astrology where he's like, yeah, whatever. And Sri Yari is his teacher, is like Yukteswar. He's like, look, man, if you don't wear this, you will die. It's in the stars. I said, what? And then he has to wear his bangle and he makes it through this really tremendous sickness. And, it was more like that. It's like, you are at the effects of these things out there, and you don't want to do your chart. You just don't want to get done by it. Right? Like that's the old thing. Really, it really is. Right. And it's like really kind of the humanistic astrologers, Dane Rudhyar, right? The astrology of personality, like, who is like, wait a second, we want to do our charts. Your chart is you. And that's how I know it, how I teach it, right? Like this is literally, you are the expression of a unique moment of the universe in a very specific place. An expression that could never repeat, And so, of course, you want to know all of that and you want to grow all of that and be all of that, right? But that's something I just very much take for granted. And I read some of this old stuff. It's like, oh, that really was not the philosophy, not the cosmology. Now, did Uranus change that? Changed a lot. So it's interesting, right? Because when we ask, well, what is Saturn? We can literally go back a couple thousand years and read what some of the ancients had to say. An interesting thing is it's pretty different than what you would say now. If you read about Taurus in the day, it's like, oh, it's Venus's nocturnal sign. It's associated with the northeast wind. It's like, it is earthly, it is fertile, and yet it's like cold and I don't know what I should be careful because I don't know that I'm going to get all those right. But anyway, you're not going to hear this, oh, it's this sensual, juicy, embodied Epicurean, tasting every cell of the fruit with every cell of your tongue, and like that. It's like drinking the sunset as if it is a mimosa poured just for you by God. Like you don't hear any of that, right? I don't know if that one's ever been said anyway. But it was a very different thing. You know what I'm saying? And that's kind of like, this is like how astrology has been kind of redreamed. And I think, as I said last time, or attempted to during the course of our many disconnects due to my internet, which is maybe a Uranian thing. But I was reminded to go Saturn style, and now I'm hardwired over here. Okay, so we shouldn't have that ish. Anyway, that going back, bringing back some of these old texts and dusting them off, it's like, whoa, that's a like different astrology. And wow, we forgot that. We forgot that, yeah, that makes sense that it's different if you're born by day and night, and there would be a different set of rules. But actually, I can dig that. That really makes sense because day and night are different animals. And after the sun sets, and especially once the stars come out, like I create in a different way. I experience life in a different way. So interestingly, some of the kind of the Uranian things that are happening in astrologists right now, when I say that, I mean some of the things like that are changing. And there's this revolution in a sense by like getting old. And it's really interesting that for the most part, it's like great young astrologers who are going like old school, and people practicing like old magic too, right? So in like Hellenistic old texts of like what you wear if you're going to go do a Jupiter ritual and what you say, but they don't say anything about Uranus. So some years ago, I had a friend, he's an amazing being, and he's like, hey man, like what are good things to do for Uranus magic? And I was like, yeah, probably don't do them. Like, I'm not sure that you want to go to that guy, that crazy, I like to call Uranus Dr. Strange. It's just electric. We say lightning bolts and accidents and things that are out of control. And though, you know, there's one thing that I love from David Cochran that's just like, it's like, where did that come from? So David's like, it's free jazz, man. Uranus, right? Because it's just like out of the nowhere, like channeled in, and just like shocks you into the moment. And, you know, that's like the calling, that's the invitation of the car accident that you survive. I mean, that's even the invitation of like internet disconnect or whatever. It was cool to hear. I was listening to this thing earlier about a man who's like very much a symbolist, and his house flooded. And they had to move out for a couple of years, and he was just coming back, and he's like, yeah, well, that's the stuff we talk about, the things you ignore from down deep. And, you know, and suddenly, and it has a message. So a really great question is, well, what is the message of Uranus? Because we can't go to the old books and find out what was said. Wasn't known. It used to go like this, right? Earth, then the sphere of the moon, who's so close to us. And why do we know? She gets around real quick. Moon, Mercury, Venus, Sun, Mars, Jupiter, Saturn, stars, and God. Right? And so for one thing I would say is like the Uranian revelation itself. Now, Uranus was discovered in 1781 as a planet. I would suggest that probably wouldn't have happened if we hadn't been converted to a heliocentric or sun-centered cosmology through the Copernican Galilean thread, which itself wasn't easy, right? I mean, those cats were up against like a very kind of Saturnian force and a very religious force, obviously. Copernicus, famous to have published on his way out, right? Because this is like when you say, oh, the earth isn't the center of it all, right? You are literally speaking a blasphemy. And he like asked the Pope for permission. Right? I'm just seeing your experience of this, Amanda. I'm wondering if there's any words that are coming out.
Well, it's just so amazing to think about what is the equivalent of that at our time now.
Oh.
These things that are blasphemous right now that we look at and go, what? He had to ask the Pope for permission? Like, that's crazy. But it's still happening, just in different arenas. And it's fascinating to think about.
Try to take a hike 40 feet away from people without a mask on in California right now, you know? Anyway, we don't need to go there, please. But, right, so Galileo went there, right? Galileo, he's like you. He got his telescope and he started checking stuff out. And this technology was new, you know, contrary to like popular teachings. Galileo did not invent the telescope, but he very much like improved upon it. And he had the best scope of the day, you know? And Galileo, it's cool. Galileo, people don't know he's an astrologer. He'll be one of my principal chart and sky chart examples for our course. Because I love it when the astronomers are like, you know, astrology's nonsense. I'm like, ask Galileo. Think he was smart?
How do you know that he was an astrologer? Because
we have his chart in his own hand.
Oh.
And we see that he was rectifying, and he was actually put in front of the Inquisition, not the time it's famous for, which I'll get back to, but because he was practicing not only astrology, which, by the way, he was teaching medicine, and you can't teach medicine in that day without knowing astrology or teaching astrology. Straight up. And that wasn't long ago, right? Like you literally do not teach medicine in the university without teaching astrology, because it's imperative not only to diagnosis, but also like elections for procedure, surgery, whatever. I had a filling today. I was like all in my chart. And I'm like, oh, we should wait 23 minutes. That's maybe a different story. But actually, maybe we can circle back to that. It might be part of it. So Galileo, first of all, there were some things, the rumor is there were some things that were happening outside of his marriage. And that's not cool with the Pope. And that he was not only practicing astrology in the okay side of astrology, but that he was predicting things, right? Which is certainly blasphemous. And so it said that agents of the Inquisition came knocking, and not much more is said about that. So obviously he got through that one unscathed. It was many, many years later when he reported to Rome. If Galileo had known that that dot that he fixed his telescope on that can't be seen with the naked eye is Uranus, or that other one is Neptune, he would know that he was born with the sun in a very strong alignment with those two planets. He had sun square Uranus, sun in what's called the T square with Uranus and Neptune, which actually, especially in the signs in which they're involved, can very much look like a heretic. Now, so he wouldn't have known that the day that he reported to the Inquisition that Saturn was transiting his Uranus. Wow. But that was happening. He would have known for sure that Saturn was squaring his sun, but Saturn was at his Uranus opposite his Neptune, right? And Saturn, is certainly not the only thing. So Saturn is the council of grandmothers, the elders, the wisdom. They're the ones, sadly, who have been pushed aside and called older, right? So what has taken their place, right? That's an important thing for us to ask ourselves. At one point, that thing was called the Pope, right? And so the Pope came to visit, the rules, the Inquisition came to visit his heretical, freaky, Uranian, inventive, I hear Koa just like screamed something. It was like that, and you can just see it in the transits. It's one of the most obvious transit examples of all time. And so other evidence of Galileo as an astrologer, or at least doing an astrologer's work to get paid, likely, is that on the back of his first drawings of moon's craters. Okay, this is one of the things that got him in trouble. He showed that the moon is not a perfect sphere. Now it's like you look at the moon and you can tell. But maybe until somebody told us that the moon is cratered, we couldn't see it. And that seems weird, but maybe, right? And so he's in his telescope seeing these massive craters and stuff, and it's not a perfect sphere, which is like part of what godliness is apparently back in the day, right? So he's drawing this. He's noticing that Venus is in phases. Venus is never full from Earth's point of view. Very good reasons. I'll show you another time. And that's not cool, because basically that means that Venus is not orbiting the Earth, which he very much proved. These were all proofs, not so much the moon, but certainly that thing of Venus, of the Copernican reality, as was discovering the so-called Galilean moons of Jupiter, which are the first 4 moons of Jupiter to be discovered by Galileo, but he didn't name them that. He named them after Cosimo de' Medici's kids, because that's where the money was at. You know what I mean? And maybe there's other reasons, like Medici, we owe a lot to him. He had his agents scouring the globe, looking for sacred scriptures from all about. And this is actually when the Corpus Hermetica, which is really at the roots of not only Western astrology, but Western mystery tradition and magic and much more, like that's when they came back to the Western mind. And I think I've said this and I'll say it again. I just see Michael wrote, Medici changed the world. Absolutely. And this is kind of at the end of his days. And it said that he had his agents stop the translations of Plato to address their attention fully to Hermes, right? I mean, they knew what was up. And this is very much responsible for a renaissance in in the world. It was like astrology was one of the things that was leading that renaissance, which is cool to know. And that's happening now, I would say, right? So he named these Galilean moons, as they're called today, after Medici's kid. And on the back of the drawing of his first drawing of moon craters is the birth chart of one of Medici's sons.
Wow.
Right? Who had just been born. And he shows that Jupiter he's a child of Jupiter with Jupiter on high, and he's fit to be a king and these kinds of things, you know? So I love that. I love so much, like, it's well known that Johannes Kepler was an astrologer. And the further you go back, it's like, of course there are astrologers. That's what astronomy is. Of course, astrologers are astronomers. That's what astrology is, right? But it obviously diverged. And, you know, Galileo, of course, is the hero for the rationalist scientists. So to have that kind of like hero carpet pulled out, it's pretty tricky for them.
Brett, do you think astrology was different enough then that the astronomers would still write it off as, yeah, he was an astrologer, but not like astrologers today? My question is, what would Galileo have said astrology is used for? Would it be similar to what we say now, or totally something different?
Yeah, well, when you look at what he was writing about Medici, for example, and this new child who was born, it's, you know, very similar to, I mean, gosh, reaching into the beginning of horoscopic astrology, I mean, like personal birth charts, you know, it's like, you're going to be a king or you're going to be a beggar, right? It's kind of in that realm. So it's very kind of, you know, predictive to the highest degree in a sense. But he also might have been writing in that language because it's exactly what Medici wanted to hear about his new child. I mean, it's hard to say, right?
Well, not
so,
yeah.
ahead.
Well, I was just going to say that's what Rick Levine says about Kepler, that he basically wrote off astrology, but the kind of astrology that the kings were asking him to practice. He had a whole different kind of astrology that he loved, that he would much rather be using astrology for. He didn't want to use it just to predict war or, you know, things like that. So it's questionable, right? What they were, where their hearts really were around the whole thing.
And, you know, historically a tough gig.
Yes.
Because you're getting paid pretty well when they're winning the fights, you know, you want to be on the strong team as in that job, right? Because if you say you're going to lose, they're like, we need a better astrologer. And if you say you're going to win and you lose, then they kill you, right? So pretty tough gig. Like, I wouldn't take that one if I was asked. I was like, oh, no, I'm an astronomer. So, yeah, I don't know. I mean, one thing we know about Kepler, which is beautiful, is that, you know, he in a sense was like out to like disprove some of the evidence because it was denying the perfect form of the sphere. That's the goddess, you know, in the number tradition that I also teach, right? In geometry, like the circle is where it's at. And then he came into, you know, the orbital equations that we use today still that describe the elliptical motion, and that there's like not one perfect center, that there's these two foci. But he ended up finding all of these beautiful behaviors of elliptical energies that were like more heavenly for him. Right. So, and that's this thing, right? You realize that, you know, the way that I think you and I and probably most people here are engaging with our birth charts. And so you're looking at this thing, it's like, woof, like that just shattered me, especially because the way that person's talking about it online, they're like, that's not it. But I can actually, that opened a door for me to look at this thing that I do or have done or has been in my life, or this trauma I went through, and ooh, yeah, there it is. And it's like, I just effed up the circle. I just messed with the perfect form. Oh no, like that's what breaks me through to the place where I get to see. And I love teaching this with the compass, right? I always want my students not just using the computer apps and the technology, but actually sweeping a compass, because when you try to draw these, like, you know, complicated geometries like the flower of life, like you can't do it perfectly. Like the sticker that I'm holding up for the audio people is a flower of life sticker. It's a lot of circles. And so you get to learn that imperfection is part of the perfection. It's a really important lesson. And Uranus I think, offers that teaching. I think all of these outer planets. Okay, so let's fast forward to the discovery of Uranus. This is well after the Copernican revolution. So Copernicus did his thing. Everybody's like, yeah, whatever. That's not true. And a few of them were like, yeah, it is. And so they burned them. And Galileo was like, yeah, it is. And let me prove it to you again and again and again and again. Here's all the data. Now, where Galileo went wrong is he kind of wrote this book that basically spoofed the Pope. So it's like he was really pushing it. And his chart, it's cool. His chart is very heretical in this way. But, you know, he ended up not being burned, not being killed. He was put on house arrest where he got to finish his works, you know. It's like the one who knows. And I was told this by our friend Gary Caton when I got to my Uranus opposition, because he saw that I was engaging at the time in a lot of conversations with people who were into this Earth is flat scene. And I was trying to help them see like actual astronomy that they could see with their eyes that disproved that. Right. But I also wanted to hear that argument. That'd be actually a fun episode for us to do sometime. And Gary's like, hey, man, he's like, I see you spending so much energy like this. He's like, your Uranus opposition is coming up. That's when you move from there's all these things I'm going to do to, oh, my God, there's all these things I won't have time to do. And that one in me wants the lonely capsule mission to Mars. Just me and my saxophone. And all I can do is play music and get great. You know what I mean? Or just like locked in house arrest where I'm sure he was getting good, well fed and all this stuff. And he can just really finish these works that have to come out before he's allowed to. You know what I'm saying? So it wasn't as bad for him. And finally it caved. I mean, it had to, because the sun is the center of our solar system. Now, even when Newton was around, it was assumed that the sun did not move. And so I will actually say that some of the assumptions in many of the astronomical equations today that are remnants from times before we understood that the sun also is just flying through the space and pulling her planets along with her, that they need an update. So that's maybe a tale for another. They need a little Uranus. So Uranus is this lightning bolt. This is how we teach it, right? Uranus is revolutionary, freaky. It's going to change things up. Accidents, and including, by the way, like as much as like trauma, okay, to like I stubbed my toe, to, oh, well, eureka moment, sudden insight, that kind of channeled energy. Right. We'll speak about Neptune another time. Neptune like offers those kinds of insights, but it's not like an insight, which is a like mind word, isn't it? And some call Uranus like the higher octave of Mercury. There's a cool book by Barbara Handclough that calls Chiron the Rainbow Bridge. And the general idea is that Chiron's orbit moves between Saturn and Uranus, and goes into the visible realms, which end with Saturn, and then out to the invisible realms of Uranus. And so he's kind of connecting the two. Actually, that's Uranus for me. I have seen Uranus with my naked eye. And that changed everything. And for me, that means Uranus is the bridge between the very easily last visible one, who is Saturn, and the one you can never see with the naked eye, who begins with Neptune. Unless we're considering many other beings, asteroids, centaurs, and other astronomical stuff. That same night I saw Uranus as a Joshua tree. I saw Vesta with my naked eye that night too. So she's the only one of the asteroids that it can be done, it said. And that really changed my cosmology. So when Uranus was discovered, like, first of all, the cosmology had changed. No longer is the Earth at the center. The sun is at the center. And the math works so much easier. Like the way that cats were trying to mathematicize their way out of the problems of retrograde planets using an Earth-centered model, it just can't work. So they had to create all these maths, you know, and I think a lot of our superstitions, we've talked about this, that are kind of remnant of that time of the brain that can't solve the problem are also like married to some of the delineations that astrology gives to retrogradation now. Retrograde Uranus is when Uranus can be seen. Because if you remember when we were talking about Mercury retrograde some time ago, a thing I said that everyone should know is that in the middle of a planet's retrograde period, whether it's the planets that live between us and the sun, orbitally speaking, and that's Mercury and Venus, who I like to call the interior decorators for that reason, or those that exist without, Mars, Jupiter, Saturn, and beyond, the middle of a planet's retrograde period is when Earth and that planet are closest to one another. So we can see Uranus with the naked eye when Earth is closest to Uranus, when Earth is passing Uranus by. And that happens about once a year. You see it in the chart when the sun is opposite Uranus, because the center of the chart is the Earth. So sun opposite Uranus means literally Uranus is rising at sunset. Therefore, Uranus is culminating, reaching its height at the middle of the night when it's darkest in the sky, so more likely to see, right? And Earth is closest, so a little bigger, brighter. And if the moon's not around, like if it's new moon time, and you get away from the urban lights and the pollution, you know, you can see Uranus. It's a cool thing. Uranus had been seen well before 1781 when William Herschel and his sister Caroline at their home in Bath, England, fixed their new telescope, right? So you're going to get a telescope that's, I think it's more powerful than theirs probably. And I saw a picture of what you're ordering. It's pretty small, right? They had this thing that's like, you know, the whole yard. It's like, I don't know its dimensions, but I've seen pictures. It's like, oh my gosh, is that a telescope or a spaceship? Like, what are those people doing? It's this giant thing, you know? And so technology was really coming online at this time. So 1781, in the month of March, we're just about at an anniversary of the Uranus discovery. And they're comet hunting, right? So if you had the funds and you could afford one of these giant telescopes, that's the thing to do, is to hop inside your spaceship-sized telescope device and look at these things in the sky that you can't even see with the naked eye. I mean, how strange is that? Right? I mean, and Uranus is often said by modern astrologers to be kind of the planet that rules astrology itself. You know, I'm old school and I'm a child of Mercury. So I know that Mercury brought us numbers and the alphabet and all the things and all the codes and all the systems. So that's my cat when I'm asked that question. But there is something very Uranian about astrology, because in a sense, Uranus stands for the symbol of these times where we were learning to experience things that exist beyond the limits of our senses. Right? In astrology, when practiced right, astrology is a way in rather than astrology is a way out. Yeah, that's what it's about. So you can tune into parts of yourself that you might otherwise never tune into. And you know you're not making it up. You just had a tool that's like, hey, have you ever considered this? And you're like, ooh, I got that one. Oh yeah, like, yeah, we should cure that probably, right? Or whatever. Or, wow, yeah, I do have that superpower. I should use that for good. Yeah, and so these are gifts that our craft offers when applied, you know, with an open heart, I think, and good intention. So here they are, they're hunting comets, and people are just hunting comets, you know, and you find things. It's like, a comet, right? And they track them, and you call everybody. I don't know how you were doing it in 1781, right? But you let the whole astronomical community know, then everyone's looking at the new comet and it goes on the list, right? And people are finding these other objects. And so William and Carolyn Herschel, who themselves had maybe kind of a Uranian relationship. I don't know. They were brother and sister, not husband and wife, who were hanging out, living together. They found a comet and they reported it. And everyone's got their giant spaceship-sized telescopes, you know, lensed into this new comet, but suddenly it doesn't move like comets do. That's a planet. That changes everything, right? That changes everything for astronomy, who is like a little bit more ready, I would imagine. I don't know. And we can look back in charts from way back and see that Uranus was certainly participating with, the happenings on Earth well before we knew he was out there. I mean, you can look at Uranus and Neptune and Pluto all coming together, and that's like Lao Tzu and, like the Buddha. And I mean, and much more than that. But still, when are we ready to be aware of them regularly and track them and bring them into our astrology? Is there some kind of level of consciousness that humanity itself had attained or was ready to attain, that was ready now for this new symbol, character, player, activator, initiator, whatever you want to call that being, who is so weird? And you know what William Herschel decided to name this new planet he had discovered?
I'm guessing it's not Uranus.
It's not Uranus. George. Right? So the Georgian star. Why? Because he wanted that payroll. King George. He wanted that bank. I just talked to Adam Summer the other day, and he was like, yeah, I went to William Herschel's place. He's like, yeah, it's like quaint little place with a spaceship-sized telescope, I guess. I was like, oh, that's interesting. Like, he just kind of assumed, like, this guy's like one of the most famous, like, astronomers ever. And there's a lot of other things he discovered, which are cool. But he was then bankrolled to do his thing by the king, right? Because he made the right play. He's like, hey, there's a new planet. What are you calling it? Nobody named a planet before. I mean, somebody did. Right? There's a huge scene of cultural appropriation happening in our day and age, which I think is a very important conversation and such, Who wrote this word called Jupiter? Right? Am I Latin? You know what I'm saying? Astrology, it's like an assembly of appropriations, if you will. They're just from so long ago. It's like, seems to get the pass. That's when I'm always interested in. But who named Mercury? And before that, he was Hermes, right? In the Greek tongue. And before that, maybe Jehuti. Or in India, they call Hermes Buddha or Mercury Buddha. They call Jupiter Guru. So it depends where you are, right? There'll be names for these planets in Hawaii where you live. Well, who named them? But here, we had a new planet called George. Now, how do you think the American astronomers felt about that? Because if you know your history, 1781 happened to be the middle of a war, of a revolutionary war. And it's also leading up to the French Revolution, right? So, I mean, like the Americans were the cats that would become Americans, right? The colonialists here in this land where I live, like they were revolting against King George. So they're not trying to put George in their ephemeris, right? That wasn't going to land here, at least. And it didn't land anywhere because people were like, really, George? We need some rules around this, right? So, I mean, the whole astronomical community was like, how do you name a fucking planet? Right? Like, this is a part of my language, kids. But that's a big deal. And sometimes those words come out when it's a big deal. It's a big deal. Right. And we're going to have to put some interesting, we're going to have to call it in Saturn, right? We're going to have to put in some rules around this thing. Well, all the other planets are named after Roman gods. Shouldn't this one be too? They tried Neptune on for Uranus.
Wow.
I wish I had the numbers up. It was decades before a name landed for Uranus. I believe. And interestingly, it was another astronomer that's named Bode or Bode, famous for Bode's law and many other things, who eventually recommended the name Uranus, and it landed. But they tried Neptune and it was like, and interestingly, uranium was discovered. I mean, the radioactive principles of uranium was discovered in 1789, some years later. right? And literally named for Uranus. So I say decades, but it wasn't that long. Like these things were co-named. And, interestingly, and we don't want to talk too much about this, but to make like working nuclear stuff, plutonium, uranium is enriched, and it goes through a hidden stage called neptunium to get there. Wow. Right? So, and the very small, like in the atomic things and the way we're like wizardly playing with this stuff, whether that's a good thing or not, it's echoing the very large. Or the kind of large, because we also know now that our solar system is, not as large as we thought and all that. These are the things that Uranus, in a way, and at least the symbol of the times in which Uranus was discovered, were about. This is also the Industrial Revolution. Right? There's a reason why Uranus could be discovered, because there's a telescope like the size of a spaceship in these people's backyard. You know what I mean? Like things were starting to happen, and it's like material advances. Right? So now we can look back and see the Industrial Revolution as this significant trauma on some regards. It's also nice. And I try to have gratitude every time I flick a switch and it's like, oh, the light goes on. And then it goes off. You turn this thing and the water gets hot. It's amazing, right? Like, I think if we try to not take advantage of that, or take all that stuff for granted, and think about those who don't have the switches and the stuff. And it's a nice reminder where I sit actually right now is a beautiful sacred mountain just there. And it used to have a peak that's taller than the one it has now, but the army leveled it. And then at the base is a Chevron refinery, So it's like, oh, cool. Let's turn those lights off. Let's get the solar on the roof and those things. But what is the solar on the roof? Is that ruled by the sun? Probably, but it's a very Uranian thing, because we associate Uranus with electricity, right? This was the dawning of the new age. I mean, so there's a lot of disagreement about, is it Aquarius yet? Like, what time is it, right? It's a very good question. I would say from the astronomical criterion of the ages, no. But the fact that you and I are talking live, and you're like thousands of miles that way in the middle of the ocean through space beams, and we have all these other wonderful people commenting things like Thoth and yellow cake. By the way, Christy Belly, Thoth is the Greek name for the one that in that land was named Jehuti, who I was speaking about before. So anyway, Uranus changed everything, right? And it really is, for me, when I sit with somebody in a Uranus transit, like in a really significant Uranus transit, and you can feel it in them. And typically, they're feeling it. I bring out the Tower card and the one from the Rider-Waite Tarot. Right? Like that classic lightning bolt just towers on fire. And one is falling and one is diving to their death. I don't know. We can't see the bottom of the card. There might be like a moat and they're going for a nice swim or whatever. But the old structure is crumbling. And when that card was created, though it was after Uranus was discovered, it was associated with Mars. But for me, it's very Uranian. And it's very much about this interface of Saturn and Uranus, who in a sense could not be more different, because Saturn is the rules and Uranus is our inspiration to break them. Or Saturn is, the traditions and the structures, and Uranus wants to like blow that up so we can advance and change. And, in modern astrology, Uranus is associated with the sign of Aquarius. Traditionally, no. Traditionally, that's Saturn's realm. So it's interesting to know right now, in this time we're recording this, that Saturn and Uranus themselves are kind of in a very active conversation. We call it astrological square, which I should say is an astronomical square. And they might be having a conversation about whose house is this. Right? But I don't see why Uranus would want to do anything that has the word rules in it. right? So I'm like, where I first started my study, there's no rulership, like that's patriarchal weirdness. And but I've really taken to classical astrology. And I like this idea that all of the planets have a nocturnal and a diurnal sign. I like the balance that's offered there. I like the structure. I like the Saturnian like form there, you know. But I have to admit, there's something rather Uranian about Aquarius, and there's something rather Aquarian about Uranus. But I would love to know, and I don't, and maybe somebody listening does. If you do, please write it in. Oh, like for example, so this is great, right? This new format, we have like the whole village contributing live here. And so Leda Powers wrote, it seems Uranus was named in March 1782. Deep bow. So not decades and decades, I said that, like the next year.
Well,
I'm not too exaggeration.
Because I was wondering how long it was George. I mean, decades and decades of George would be really fascinating.
Yeah, I mean, I think we should research that, right?
Yeah, we need to get to the bottom of that. And then Rhiannon asked, how long did astronomers or astrologers study Uranus before the qualities of Uranus were defined?
Yeah, that's what I would love to know, right? Who was the first one to say, like, hey, you know what? That planet actually rules Aquarius.
Right.
And what did everybody say? Right? It's like, check, please. You know, when that conversation came up. But I can feel this because one of the ways that we can feel the signs, and it's, you know, like I was born on the cusp of Libra and Scorpio, that my sun sign is the first degree of Scorpio, right? And so this idea of cusps is interesting. Now I have Mercury in the sign of Libra, and he's the guiding planet of my ascending sign of Gemini and right? But for a while, when I was first tuning in, it was just sun sign astrology. It's like, oh, I'm a cusper, am I this or that? In the Hellenistic approach, there's not really cusps. It's like you jump a wall, right? From this polarity to that, from this element to that, from this modality to that. They speak a different language. They are governed by a different planet. It's a, you know, now when I watch the moon change signs, I don't experience that. I don't see her disappear and then show up in a different color. Sometimes I can feel it, right? And some, you know, sometimes it's like, oh, the moon changed signs. Let me see where that is in the heavens. Sometimes I'm not even looking at stars. I'm just like, whew, that feels different. Hey, did the moon just go into Scorpio? And it's like, yeah, okay. Anyway, so one way I love to talk about the signs, as we often do, is you kind of do your Capricorn, and that will lead you to Aquarius, and that will lead you to Pisces. But another way that I like to teach the signs is that no, every sign is a reaction to the needs of the sign that precedes it. Mm-hmm. Or else that sign's dreams would just take us off the wheel. So the classic example I always start with is, if Pisces had its way, we would never incarnate. So Aries has to respond and say, no, it's about me. Who am I? What is my mountain to climb? What is my mission? You know, for Capricorn, it's tradition. And this is kind of a northern hemispheric wrap. Like, I like to be more global with my astrology, but it really does feel like that image of kind of hunkering down in the cold and picking the right cave and the right, you know, tribe to survive the winter time. And here you are just stuck in the cave, and it's awful. And, you know, it's only getting colder in the northern hemisphere when we move into the Aquarian time, right? And somebody has the vision, you know, like you realize that checkers aren't any fun, so you don't want to do that anymore. You've been trying to make eyes with that person across the cave. It ain't happening. She went for that other guy or whatever, you know, so you're just in your own, right? So you go in and you get out, you know, and you have this revelation. You connect to the mind of all that is, and we receive the vision. It's like cross ventilation. That place you're stuck in stinks. Drill a hole in the wall and drill a hole in that wall. And now the air is going to come through. And you're like, we'll freeze. And the voice of heaven says, no, it will warm you up. It's cross ventilation. It's the new trip. You know, that's great. And it's true. But how many eons is it going to take for the tradition of the cave to believe you? Somebody's going to have to carve those holes in the middle of the night, and they're going to die. And then those holes are going to get plugged up. But eventually, right? Eventually they will see, oh, probably shouldn't have killed that guy. Great invention. It doesn't smell so bad in here anymore, and it's a lot warmer, right? So that, in a sense, is this kind of like Aquarian reaction to Capricorn. It's like, cool, we're grounded. We have these rules. We understand the structure. Now, how can we make it better? So it's really interesting to think about in this old association, how does Saturn do that? Or is Aquarius about something else? And did Uranus, therefore, actually completely revolutionize what we think about that sign? Because it is hard for most like modern astrologers to connect to this old vision of Aquarius as a Saturnian thing. And you can find your way there, and there's a lot of gems in that treasure box, actually, but it's a heavy lid. It's a hard one to open up, depending on where you started this thing, right? But it just feels, there's something very Aquarian about Uranus. There's something very Uranian about Aquarius. And think about it, it's shocked. It must have just shocked our community. It was that one. It's like, oh, Uranus rules Aquarius. It's like, banish them from the cave. Do you know what I mean? Like, but how long did that take? And I wish I had the answers here, friends, but we all have the internet. I guess I do too. But I'm starting to build an astronomy for astrologers class. So I invite you. Maybe our scavenger hunt this time is actually an internet beam scavenger hunt. And we go out and we try to find cool things about Uranus, Dr. Strange. I'll share a couple other things I did found. This is weird, but it can rain diamonds on Uranus. Does it regularly. Neptune too. It smells like farts. So, right, there's all this methane, like straight up. And of course, the issue with Uranus, and you hear me say it that way because I used to say Uranus, and then somebody's like, oh, it's Uranus. And I was like, I'll be Uranus. And then my friend Maria's like, dude, you're just saying urine now. It's like, oh, dang. Like, you can't even say the name of this thing without like cracking a joke you're not trying to.
Oh.
Right? So there's something like uncomfortable about it. There's something uncomfortable about astrology too. There's something glorious and beautiful and breakthrough and look to the other side and, ascend. Uranus in that regard is a very kind of heavenly force, but it's the forces of heaven that sometimes, you don't want, but they want you. And in the end, we're so grateful for them because the change has come. And that's the gift of that freak accident. That's you broke the leg on the skiing trip, but it finally helped you realize that guy's not the one for you. Or, these like really important things happen from these sudden experiences in life. And in some ways, it's potential. I like to say, choose change before change chooses you. And that's one of the great gifts of astrology. You see it coming. You see what coming? I don't know. You see something coming. What does it want? That's a better question than what will it be? What does it want? What offerings are you willing to bring? Right? And so Uranus changed everything really in just giving us this new symbol that's a little bit less. It's interesting. It's both things. It's both like it's going to happen, and it's less like it's going to happen. Right? I know I just said the same thing in both ways. There's this kind of contradiction in Uranus in that regard. It feels, in a sense, less fatalistic, and yet it's kind of like difficult to miss. You can, by the way, you can miss your astrology altogether. You can just smoke a ton of television and just coast through and count your dollar bills or do whichever and watch your MTV. I'm dating myself, but whatever, and you can actually kind of sail through these things, and it's like not that much is happening. You're unaware of it. Right? But once you become aware and once you start seeing beyond the limits of your senses, which, by the way, William Herschel later discovered infrared. Why? Because he refracted light through a prism. So again, technology, and interestingly, optics being utilized for us to expand our experience beyond the limit of our senses. So 2 more things, because I realize we're at time. These new planets, these planets you can't see with your naked eye, so they don't have names from way back in time. They seem to, one, have delineations associated with literally the way they were discovered. Technology, Uranus. Freak accident, thought it was a comet. Nope, changed the world. The zeitgeist of the times in which they were discovered. Revolutions, 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 technology, radiation, playing God, which is what that thing has led to in some regards, right? Interesting. Rick Tarnas has made a very, I think, important case that perhaps Prometheus is a better mythological fit for the planet Uranus. But we can see it both ways. We can see it as this kind of heavenly being, and also this one who stole the fire to bring us the creative gift. So the last thing I'll say is this: we were able to catch up to the ephemerides, the planetary tables, where Uranus would be in the zodiac way faster than we would have been able to through observation, because Uranus had been seen by many. Ancient Chinese records from many places around the earth. I want to be careful because I don't know the facts, but I know that that is a fact. I just don't know exactly where. But throughout time, people saw this star and then it went away. Well, that wasn't a star, right? And so we're actually looking back and seeing that Uranus is on the record. So people had received the opportunity for this shock before. And it'd be really cool to see what Uranus was up to. I know it would be opposite the sun. I know Earth would be close by. That's when Uranus is visible with the naked eye and all this, right? But it'd be interesting to see like what was happening in those times. And it was like Uranus is trying to break through and welcome us to this outer world, and we weren't ready yet. And so what is it about March of 1781? So one thing I'll encourage is this for a scavenger hunt. We were talking earlier about how the moon can be like a laser pointer in the sky, right? The moon right now is in the sign of Scorpio and just about opposite Uranus. So one thing you can do wherever you see moon tonight, and I understand many of you will be under clouds and that's not going down, but if you do, and especially if you're in a place where you can experience moon rise tonight, and I will be, bless the moon, receive her light, know that you're drinking the sunlight reflected through that beautiful gift of silver that she is, and turn your back to her and let the moon cast your shadow towards Uranus. And so I say tonight, I'm talking about Tuesday, March 2nd, 2021. All right. Alternatively, go to Saturn in the sky, and that's the morning sky. Saturn and Uranus are now square. And if you give your heart to Saturn and you reach out your arms to the sides, right? So you're facing Saturn, your arm that is west of Saturn, so in the northern hemisphere, your right arm. Wait, let me do this right. No, your left arm will be pointing to Uranus. You won't have risen yet. It's like below the ground, but just feel that energy. Feel how this image of planetary aspects can connect you to. And then the other thing I would say, just because it's really relevant and it's like all week, really connect to the opportunity of seeing Mars with the Pleiades. Yeah, it's going to be 24 to 26 months before Mars is back there. And literally just learn, this is right now, the Pleiades are teaching you that in our day and age, they mark the gateway between 29 tropical Taurus and 1 tropical Gemini. Mars is moving into Gemini tomorrow evening. Watch it happen in the heavens. And it will change your life.
Love this so much, Brett. Thank you for that journey all around Uranus and pointing out so many incredible things. So basically in 1781, it was discovered by Willam and Carolyn Herschel, who were brother and sister. They named it George to appease to the king, assumably. And we don't know when that changed to Uranus, but it did happen at some point. between maybe a year after or maybe a couple decades after. We're not totally sure.
Well, we got the date thanks to one of our Advid Village team, and I already lost it, but it was sometime in 1982. It would sound like it was about a year later that we had Uranus named.
1782.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, okay. And so when Uranus came, it shocked the world because we thought that Saturn was the end. And they thought it was a comet at first, and then they realized it was a planet. Now we know that it had been seen many times before because of its retrograde pattern. And when it's retrograde, it's closest to the Earth, so we can actually see it.
Right.
And that enabled the ephemeris. So when you say it enabled the ephemeris to happen, it enabled Uranus to get added to the ephemeris more quickly.
Yeah, so if you discover a new planet, you got to watch it for a while and do some trial and error and, track it. And so their paths are kind of crazy because they're not perfect circles. Uranus is actually very close to circular, which is kind of one of the freaky things about Uranus is that he's not that freaky in that regard. Uranus, by the way, also on average, and these are definitely averages because they're not circles, but it's 84 years around, 7 years in each of the 12 signs. And traditionally we have 7 planets and 12 signs. So there's that 84, but Uranus now brought in a new planet to the mix, right? And then really, actually, it might have happened before then, but now, you don't really think of sun and moon as planets. Maybe Uranus did that too. We're seeing some really interesting things in the comment thread about, kind of deep state politics, which are really interesting to observe around that very important time of what was happening with bank systems. And I just want to honor that that's coming in. That's very real. And it's very much alive right now. And a bunch of this crypto thing that's going down, there's something very Uranian, very Saturnian in that. It'd be a good conversation to have. We've touched into that a bit.
For sure.
I do want to say, here's a long-term scavenger hunt, because this is going to be one you want to plan for, okay? We have Scorpio new moon on November 4th, 2021. And the new moon is exactly opposite Uranus. Okay, this is literally the best conditions for seeing Uranus in the sky with your naked eye.
When is this again? Say it again.
This is November 4th of 2021.
Okay.
It'll be November 5th for some folks, but basically let's talk with a better calendar. Scorpio new moon of 2021. We have the new moon at 12, 13 Scorpio, and Uranus is at 13 Scorpio. So it's literally the best opportunity to go see Uranus in the sky with your naked eye. And because when sun is opposite Uranus, and that's the middle of Uranus's retrograde, that means Uranus rises at sunset, and therefore is at the highest for Uranus in the night sky at the midheaven. When the sun's at the IC, that's the middle of the night. And when it's new moon, of course, it's the darkest sky of the month. So November, tricky in some places, actually 15.5 degrees north of the equator for another reason we're not going to get into, but I'll show you in the class, is going to be the best place where you could literally lay on your back and see Uranus directly above your head. And Hawaii is pretty close, right? So if you find the darkest place on the island, right? And we know November is a very sacred time, as we've talked about with the Pleiades, basically, right? This will be a super powerful time, place, opportunity. I imagine that I'll be showing up just to give you a fair warning. Okay.
Perfect. I think maybe lots of our friends should show up. Maybe we do something for that. That's amazing. Okay. So mark your calendars. If you live somewhere where you can't see the night sky very well, you might want to take a little trip at that time. Maybe you want to take a trip to Maui.
Yeah, LA is, Joshua Tree's not far from LA. You can see the LA lights there more and more, sadly, but you can also see Uranus in space with your face. I've done it, right? So we don't have to get too far away from these city places. So
Okay, so we have for our scavenger hunts just today, which is, what's today, March 4th?
Second.
Today, March 2nd, Tuesday, March 2nd. You can go outside, say hello to the moon, but then turn your back to the moon and let the moon cast your shadow. And that shadow will be right where Uranus is. So
we'll point you towards Uranus.
Yes. Okay. Then all week we can go find Saturn in the morning sky, correct?
Yeah. Saturn is now rising before the sun very visibly.
Okay.
No matter where you are, more so in the southern hemisphere, but very much up here in the northern, everywhere we'll be able to see Saturn rising before the sun, if the clouds allow. And if you go, just give your heart, just do this, give your heart to Saturn, reach your arms out to your side, and try to experience which one of them is pointing to Uranus. We'll leave it kind of right. And just feel that electricity and feel that square.
Okay. And then we have go outside, find Mars, and Mars is with the Pleiades. And I love what Carolyn says. She says, wow, I saw the Pleiades 2 nights ago with Mars close by. I found it when I found the Orion belt and Orion pointing to the Pleiadians. I was in the middle of a lake, frozen, and I was in awe, completely speechless. It was beautiful. Thank you for inviting me to look at the stars with a new perspective.
I love it. Now, usually when we hear you saw the Pleiadians, we want to hear what the space people told us, okay? But I love hearing that so much. And yeah, it's cool, right? So this is something we'll certainly be talking about in the Sacred Astronomy course of what some of the astronomers call star hopping. It's like if you know Orion, well, Orion's going to point you over there to the Pleiades in one direction. You can go the other direction and see Sirius, right? And so some of the constellations that you get to know, they're going to direct you around the place. We can draw lines through these 2 stars and jump over here and meet this one and that kind of thing. It's a fun thing to do.
Yes. Amazing. Thank you so much, Brett, for being here with us for this StarryTelling adventure. Once again, for those of you interested in joining Brett for his more in-depth course that we'll be offering in April. I'm hearing that echo thing again, Brett. I don't know if I did something, but there you go. You can go to astrologyhub.com/sacred astronomy. That's astrologyhub.com/sacred astronomy. That course is going to begin in April. In the meantime, enjoy your scavenger hunts. We'll be here same time, same place next week for StarryTelling. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you for being a part of our community and for making the sky a part of your astrology practice. Brett, anything you want to say as we close out?
No, just like, please hip us, right? Like teach us. If you find out more cool information about this Uranian thing, put it in the comments of this video, whether you're watching it on Facebook Live or later or at YouTube or wherever it's posted up, or, go into the many Astrology Hub places that you're member with, or if you're in the inner circle, and like, let's hear some of these things about Uranus. What are some of your experiences with Uranus too? I could tell some tales there. All right, Amanda, thank you so much. It's really wonderful to see you again. I'm just so happy to be able to share some stories of the stars and the planets and stuff here. It's a really wonderful community, of course. It's like my fave. So thank you very much for honoring me with this opportunity.
Thank you for honoring us with you. All right, everybody, take care. We'll see you soon.